How is it possible that I've been making anthropology YouTube videos for a year and a half and I still have not talked about my experience as a museum ambassador? Hello everyone, my name is Alivia Brown and I am currently a fourth-year undergraduate student at UCLA studying anthropology. And if you're new to this channel, I make videos about anthropology every single Sunday, whether that is about my experience as an anthropology student or defining anthropology terms. It's all there, so if you want to go check any of those videos out, please do. But without further ado, let's talk about museums for the next 10 minutes. So not only is it a very common route for anthropology students to go on to pursue careers in the museum space, but I think it is also one of the few stereotypes about anthropology that's actually true. We do not study dinosaurs, if you didn't know that. Now, the summer after my freshman year of college, I applied to the Museum Ambassador Program at the Museum of Us in San Diego, California. Now, for anyone who may be familiar with the San Diego area or honestly just museums in general, the Museum of Us actually used to be called the Museum of Man, but the 21st century it came in clutch and it got renamed to the Museum of Us. Now, the Museum of Us in San Diego is actually an anthropology museum, and I feel like it's not super common that you can go from being an anthropology major to then working in an anthropology museum. Now, this video has a few different parts: how I got into the job, my impressions, the pros and cons, and also just the kinds of jobs that you could pursue in the museum space. So we're gonna start out with my impressions and just how I got into this. So I filled out the application online just about myself. I think I probably submitted a resume. That was literally like 2 or 3 years ago now, so it feels like a while ago. But I submitted this application online and then I found out I had a phone interview. And they just asked me questions about why anthropology is important, why it matters to me, why I think I can make an impact in the museum. And I'm pretty sure literally on that phone call during the phone interview, the woman was like, "You are a great fit for our program. Let's get you in here." And so I went in pretty soon after that phone call for a training, and there were about 3 other people there around my age, and they basically took us exhibit by exhibit, telling us what we needed to know. They gave us like a bunch of information sheets, how to interact with visitors, what we needed to know for this position, and it was really, really great, and I was starting to get really excited about it. Now let's talk about my first impressions, because I feel like people are always like, "Oh, working in a museum must be so dull and so boring," but that is not the case. The first thing, what a beautiful place to work. This museum is located in beautiful Balboa Park, and it's sunny every single day, a gorgeous, gorgeous space. And there were people from every age group, which was something that I thought was really fun. Most of the work experience that I had previous to that was working with a lot of people my own age, but I was buds with this like 70-year-old security guy who would prank all the tourists, which was honestly so much fun. Now let's back up a little bit. So at this point in time, I'm like a baby college student, right? I'm just starting to get my feet wet, but you're probably wondering at this point in the video, well, what could I do in a museum, right? What kinds of jobs would actually be available to me? So I want to share with you really quickly the top 4 museum jobs that I think could interest you, because you clicked on this video, so I feel like I kind of know your vibe. So there's 4 big ones, and I'm going to talk about them in very little detail. So if you want like another video on that, please let me know. But the first one is becoming a museum archivist or archivist. And essentially you are responsible for organizing the artifacts and exhibits that are on display. So I imagine this person being like in the basement of a museum with all their files and like this giant wall of books and making sure that everything is in the right place and is historically accurate. That is that job. But the next one is a museum curator. And museum curators are probably the most well-known museum jobs. Like I feel like a lot of people that want to go into the museum space often want to become museum curators. But basically the museum curators are responsible for actually making the exhibits. So rather than overseeing everything and making sure all the artifacts and the exhibits are how they should be, you are actually the creator. You're in touch with other museums, you're bringing things in, you're thinking about what the best way to communicate these messages are, and it's honestly a really cool thing, especially if you're passionate about what that museum is trying to share with people. So if you have a passion for natural history, for example, and you got to actually design an exhibit for the public, I mean, that's pretty awesome. Now the next one is a museum conservator, and your job is making sure that everything in this museum stays in pristine, condition. You are constantly doing research on the best ways to make sure that the art and the items on display stay in good shape. You guys have probably heard that lighting can actually hurt a painting, for example. You might want to put glass around something to protect it from the public. It's your job to clean these things and make sure things are being cleaned the right way. Yes, that's what I meant to say. And yes, so the last one is becoming a museum educator. Now, museum educators, I think this is a really great thing because it's easy to forget that the whole point of a museum is sharing these ideas with the public. So how are you conveying these messages and these historical themes, for example, to the people who are visiting your museum? And honestly, I think this is really important. It connects the public with the museum, and without an educator, what are you doing? Now, how does this connect back to me and my museum experience? So of those four, my museum ambassador position was most closely related to the museum educator position. Now, as I, like I said before, was a little baby college student, I wasn't actually in one of these big person jobs. I was just trying to figure out what I liked to do. And I like to think that I did. But now we'll jump into some of the pros and some of the cons of working in the museum space. Now, the first pro, I will say, is probably one of my favorites, and that is the fact that I got a badge. I got a very official looking badge from this museum with, is it gonna focus, with my name on it and a beautiful picture of the Museum of Man. Have I been saying Museum of Man this whole time? I hope not. When I worked there, it was the Museum of Man, but it's called the Museum of Us. Wow, what a moment. It's not focusing, but that's fine. I got a badge, I got a t-shirt, I got to walk around with a walkie-talkie. I mean, guys, I felt very, very important. And not gonna lie, I really enjoy that feeling. So I guess those are all one big pro kind of looped together. Another perk that I really, really enjoyed was I not only had free entrance to the museum, but I could also bring guests to the museum who also got free entrance. So because this was the summer when I was returning home from college, a lot of my friends were like, hey, let's hang out, how are you doing? And I was like, I know the perfect thing that we can do. We can go to the Museum of Us and I can give you a tour. I mean, how great is that? Another big perk, like I said, is this was an explicitly anthropology museum. I feel like often they're just like convenience, like there aren't necessarily anthropology museums near everybody, so it's hard to get into that. And because I'm from San Diego originally, it ended up being just a really perfect situation. The coworkers were also so nice. I don't know why. I get comments sometimes that are like, oh, museum people aren't nice, or I'm scared that I'm gonna hate working in a museum, but the people there were so incredibly kind to me. So I'm gonna say that's a myth. I'm gonna debunk that. Obviously every museum is different, but that was not my experience at all. And the last thing that I want to touch on is that half of my shift was actually spent in a museum exhibit, answering tourists' questions and telling visitors maybe what they wanted to know about that exhibit. And since there are so many exhibits in this museum, I got to like set myself up at my favorite one and just kind of stand there and talk to people, and I loved doing this, especially because it made me so knowledgeable about my favorite exhibits. Now, transitioning into the cons, I said that talking to people and doing that was the first half of my shift. Well, what was the second half of my shift? Now, the second half of my shift was a little less exciting as I was on door duty. I basically sat in a very fancy looking chair, I will say. I sat in this chair basically directing tourists, telling them which door to go in, where they could find the bathroom, all that good stuff, which again, you need someone doing that. And I mean, half the shift I got to do really interesting things, and during this part of the shift it was kind of boring, but you know, that's life, I guess. Now, my second con is I was not paid. This was a volunteer position working in this museum, but again, I was not looking for something paid. I had other jobs at the time. This was more to enrich myself with the anthropology community and space, and I really enjoyed doing that. So I wouldn't change anything about it. Like, the fact that I was a part of this program was good, and I would be paid now as a graduate. I think, like, if you're looking for jobs after college, you're obviously not gonna sign up to be a volunteer. So these other jobs that I talked about, curator, archivist, conservator, educator, those are things that you would be paid for, so don't worry about that. Overall, this was just such an amazing learning experience, and I would recommend it to anyone. And again, work for a museum that you're actually interested in, because if I was working at the San Diego Museum of Chemistry, I probably wouldn't be that engaged. I wouldn't be as excited about what I'm doing. So make sure that you are looking for opportunities that are aligned with you and your interests. Also, if you can start early, definitely do that. But if not, that's totally fine. It's never too late to start. And yes, I hope this gave you some insight into my experience as a museum ambassador. And let me know if you guys have any questions. I will see you all next Sunday with another anthropology video. All right, you guys. Bye.